All right, folks. So yesterday we learned about line as an element of art and how we could use some of the principles of design, like repetition, um, in order to use line and manipulate it to create art. Today we're going to go into value, which is basically a fancy way of saying shading. That is an element of art that we are going to practice today. And believe it or not, there's a couple of different ways that you could shade. So if you go to the remote learning art page, you'll know you're there because you've got the green banner. I've got a couple of art pages here. You'll notice that on the art assignments page, week 1 now has a sub page, and that's where the first assignments were, the what is art and good art versus bad art. I've made that a sub page. We are now in week 2, which had those videos about the elements and the design principles. Yesterday's assignment online is there. The drawing, all of the resources for line are there. And we are now on the page for shading. All of the things I'm going to show you are on this page here. So I have a couple of images. I also have them saved down here. These will open up pretty large. I have separate areas for them to open up. I also have a worksheet for you to practice with. It's a little on the long side, but it pretty much is going over the things that I am going to go over with you in this video. If you don't like my voice and you want to check out this guy's voice, go ahead. I also have included a link for this artist named Chuck Close and a little bit of information on him. He does a bunch of different huge portraits, and he uses some of the shading techniques that you're going to see. So yesterday I told you that if you could master drawing basic shapes, the cone, the cube, the cylinder, and the sphere, if you could master drawing those and shading those, you pretty much can draw everything else, because everything you see in life can be broken down into some combination of those shapes. And when we get into shading, we're going to test out a couple of different techniques, and they're pretty much going to look like this. You're going to have a light side and a dark side, and we're going to use different ways of shading in order to achieve lighter and darker effects. I like to use about 6. Basically, a well-rendered, well-shaded drawing will have somewhere in the area of 5 to 6 different shades of gray, okay? And this illustrates the techniques and the style and the way that we're gonna do that. This shows you a little bit about why we're doing that. The reason we're doing that is the way that light interacts with with the objects that we're drawing. So we have this one drawing that illustrates a light source always coming from the left side. And you can see that where the light hits, we have a highlight, very light part, very light values. Where the light does not reach, which is usually somewhere on the opposite side, we have our darkest values. And then along the side, the cast shadows, we will have different midtones. And that can all be summed up also by looking at this video here. We have a highlight, we have just regular light hitting this sphere. We have a half tone, it's like a mid-tone. And then we have a very dark shadow, all right? But then we also have a little bit of reflected light, okay? Because light works kind of as a particle and kind of as a wavelength. This gets into a little bit of advanced science, but it can kind of, this is how these things happen, it reflects. And then we have our darkest value down here. So what I'm gonna do right now is I am gonna show you how on my screen, what it looks like when you've downloaded the Zoom app. It gives you the option to pin the video, and I can show you right here. I have pinned it before, I have unpinned it, and this will make it a little bit bigger. The downside of running it from your browser is it doesn't seem to allow you to do that. And so I highly recommend you come back to check out these videos. But while we are in class, I will definitely make it a point to hold up the images to my camera. But as of right now, I have a couple of different materials here. I have a Sharpie, I have a pen, I have a colored pencil, I have a regular drawing pencil, I have a regular pencil. And so I'm gonna start with my pencil. Feel free to do this along with me. Feel free to practice it afterwards. I make a rectangle, and they don't have to be perfectly spaced, but I find that the easiest way to do it is to cut one in half and then cut that one into thirds, and then I can get 6 blocks. This side, my left side, is going to be my dark side, and my right side is going to be my light side. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to do this. I'm going to try and make the darkest mark that I can on my page. Now, I am trying to cover as much of the white as I can, and I'm going in different directions to try and eliminate these pencil strokes. But because it's a practice, because it's just a sketch, I'm not fully worried about seeing those pencil strokes. What I like to do too is when I'm holding my pencil, it's not directly perpendicular, flat, against the page, but it is at a pretty sharp angle. You can get some really dark marks. You have a lot more pressure. It does make smaller marks, but again, they are small, they are dark, and you just keep going until you've covered the area that you need to. When I'm making the lightest mark that I can, I'm not pressing as hard, right? I'm going very light. I'm also turning my pencil to the side. I find that this is one of the easiest ways to make a nice, even, very, very light tone. Now, again, if this was a final project, I would definitely be going over this a few times. I would touch it up with my eraser. But for right now, I'm okay with just making a light mark, okay? The lightest mark on my page is obviously going to be the white of my paper, okay? But as you've seen from the examples I just showed you, that's not going to be the majority of your page. So I'm going to keep going and filling these and trying to press a little bit harder as I go along. I really like to go as light as I can and then make several other passes to make it a little bit darker. While I do have an eraser, there is a certain point where you can't lighten this up. I'm never going to be able to erase this to this. So I'm a little bit more comfortable starting off very light and then gradually darkening it up as I see fit. All right, so I'm going to keep going with this. You'll notice that some of the techniques that I use are that I will have my pencil going in up and down, and then I might shift to go side to side. This helps fill in some of those spots. I'm trying to keep my hand as even as I can, but even in this middle area, it looks like I made a little bit of a darker area. I'm going to keep going now. What you will find is when you're in these middle boxes, they might be very similar. Again, 5, 6 boxes can be a lot. And sometimes it's a little bit harder. Sometimes I'm a little bit more successful than other times. And it really just comes with practicing and being really mindful of how hard you're pressing. Again, my goal is to have 6 different values of gray here. And this is how I would shade if I were doing a pencil drawing. Okay, so I'm gonna add another layer to this. Okay, so these 2 shades you might find that these middle shades tend to be a little bit more similar. And again, it is what it is. Just keep trying and you'll eventually get to it. I'm going to show you another version using a pen. This is something called hatching. And this is a popular version of shading that you'll see if you read comics or graphic novels. if you look in the shadows of those drawings, you will definitely see this technique being used. You can do this with a pencil as well. I'm not saying that you can't, but I'm just trying to show as many different tools and utensils as I can. It gets its name hatching because what I'm doing is I'm making these little hatches, these little dashes across. I'm putting them very close together and I'm pressing pretty hard. You don't realize it, but you know, you can actually get a lighter mark on a page by pressing lighter with your pen. The more I put, the closer I am, the harder I press, the darker it will be. So if I add a little bit more space to my next block, you will see that it will appear a little bit lighter. I'm going to keep going. And right around this block, this third block, is usually where I start to actively pull up my pen or whatever it is that I'm using. I try to make it a little bit lighter. And then towards these last two, I'm going to really spread them out and press very, very lightly. Now, these two seem very similar, so I'm going to go in a little bit more and maybe darken a few. Maybe I'll darken my first one, right? Because there still is a lot of white showing through and I can make a difference between this one and this one. Now I called this hatching, so I've got about 6 different values here. There's also a version of this called cross hatching, and it's basically the same thing. The only difference between hatching and cross hatching is that hatching tends to have the lines going in one direction. You should also note that your lines do not have to go diagonal. They can go up and down, they can go side to side. They can actually also be curved. However you want to try it out, you can do. So cross hatching just means that you make a crisscross pattern. Depending on the effect that you're looking for, hatching might work and cross hatching might work a little bit better, or vice versa. As you can see, as I get further over to the side, I make them a little bit lighter, and they don't always reach from end to end. And I'm actually gonna try and zoom this in a little bit. Okay, I've zoomed in just a little bit. You can see that my lighter marks are here. I'm pulling that up right now, so you can see that they don't quite reach to the other side. And that helps also with making a lighter mark on the page. One of the other things that we can try is something called Scribble. And it literally is what it sounds like. It is creating shading through scribbling. So what I'm doing is I'm just making scribbling. If you take an art class, if you ever do live drawing, there's something called gesture drawing, and you literally do just scribble something in the shape of a human form. Pretty cool. The artist Chuck Close that I have posted on the shading page also has a scribble drawing. It's really cool. I highly recommend you check it out. What I'm doing is I'm making very small circles and I'm overlapping them a lot and I'm pressing pretty hard, and there I've got a pretty dark mark on the page. What I'm going to do is I'm going to redo that, but I'm not going to press as hard, and maybe I'm not going to go over it just as much because I want to make this a little bit lighter. What I like to do with these two, sometimes it helps to kind of do a light scribbling or a light hatching or a light shading throughout, and then you can kind of eyeball it a little bit better as to how to make it have a better distribution of shades. So I know that I can make this one a little bit darker, and I know that actually as of right now this one is darker than this one, so I'm going to go back and do that. Don't feel like, you know, once you're on one side and you've moved on to the next one, you can't go back. That definitely isn't the case. Okay. Now I've got these two looking a little bit similar, so I can add a little bit to here. Okay. And I can actually add a little bit to this one to make it a little bit darker. And then I think we'll be pretty close with those 6 different shades. What I might want to do is I might want to even go back into my first one and make it even darker. All right. Because what's making it appear darker is less and less of the white showing through. And the more I overlap, you can actually see the blue is getting darker and darker. Okay. So that's scribbling as a shading technique. The last one I'm going to show you is if you have a marker, if you have a crayon, this is another version, and it's called stippling. It's another popular version seen in comics and in graphic novels, and it's literally just dots. Now, it does look like I'm doing this very quickly, but I'm not haphazard. I'm not all over the place. I'm still putting my dots in this square. So I haven't like lost control. I am watching and paying attention to where I am putting my dots down. And that's going to be important because as I start to space them out and make it a little bit lighter, I need to know where they're going in order to get that effect. Okay, so here's my dark stippling. I can also change the way I'm holding my marker, and that will also have a different effect. As I get to the lighter areas, I can actually start not touching the paper as hard as I am right now. So let's see, I'm gonna keep doing that. Might have to add a little bit more here. Okay. So as I get to my 3 lightest, I generally like to say these 3 are going to be my dark ones and these 3 are going to be my light ones. So I kind of work them together. But you can see as I'm like just barely touching the page, I can make smaller and lighter marks, even with a marker. Okay. And I'll pull this up a little bit. What we're going to do after I finish this demonstration is I'm going to start showing you a few different ways to implement this. And these are the things that I would like for you to practice. Okay, so as I said before, if you can master drawing a cylinder, a sphere, a cone, or a cube, you will pretty much be able to draw whatever you want. And I'm going to show you how we can apply that. So I'm going to turn this to the side. I just love reusing paper. And I'm going to show you this bottle of Pepsi. Okay. And I'm going to show you how you can apply that cylinder block sphere thing. Okay. I'm going to draw it just as you can see it here on my video. I'm going to try and put it over here. And I will show you how you can apply that. I can start with the cylinder. Now, I do know that it's a little bit wider here and it's a little bit wider here and that it's a little bit thinner in this one, but I'm going to just start with a sketch. Never be afraid to come up with just a plain sketch that you add on to. My sketches tend to be a very, very light pressure until I'm happy with what I've got, and then I can start adding in a little bit more detail. I usually do very vague shapes, and then I start getting into more detail. So I have the beginnings of a cylinder here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a sphere right about on top. And you'll notice that I'm not drawing a perfect circle the first time around. I'm drawing many, many lines. And then when I get the general idea, the general shape that I'm happy with, then I start getting it a little bit darker. Now up here, I have almost like another cylinder. I have another block, that's where this lip is here. And then I have not as wide. We're using proportion, right, to make sure that the top of this is, I can start with a block, all right, and I know that it's not as wide. From here, I can start going in and perfecting my drawing. Now I can go in and start making the lines the way that I want them to be. I know that it's a little bit bigger on the top. This is a good way to make sure that you've got a uniform right side and left side to your bottle. I know that when I was when I used to draw, when I was first learning to draw, I would often have a hard time drawing like bottles like this, because I would have one side go down and one side would be up. So that's just one of the techniques that you can do. It's like setting yourself a guide. I know that it tapers in a little bit before coming back out. I'm going to elongate the bottom, and I know that the bottom is not flat completely. It's got these little feet. And I know that by using proportion, that other design principle, I know that these come up a little bit ways, and I know that they're about the same, so I'm measuring them off against each other. And this is kind of a shadow. But right now you can see as I'm going along, I'm getting a little bit more and more detailed, and the image, it's starting to look a little bit more like a bottle, right? I can add a little bit more detail up here. Maybe my cap, I can round it off a little bit. Okay, I can give that implication of it being a cylinder. It's always nice to have something, a flat surface. So right here's our hatching coming into play with you can see the rivets here. Okay, so that is one way to do things. So these are the ways that you can kind of set guides for yourself and improve them as you go along. All right, I can add a little bit more here. I can start adding the label. I can start adding some of these lines that you see that are in the bottle design. All right, I know my logo's over here. And the more you add and the more you work on it, the more the more the image like starts to look realistic and look like the thing that you're drawing. And those are your drawing your observational skills, right? So I know that like my barcode is going to be over here. And notice that I'm doing this without necessarily erasing all of these. Sometimes you don't necessarily have to erase every mistake, right? It's only when I start to add in shading that I might need to do that. Speaking of shading, I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to show you if I were to draw a sphere. Now I'm going to share this screen. I'm going to pull up this sphere right here, and we'll just leave it at that. I'm drawing from the Unified Classroom shading page. I'm going to draw the sphere, so I don't think you guys can see it, but I'm keeping it on my computer so that I can reference it. But if you need it, you can use it. If you want to imagine it, you can try that out as well. I'll show you. We'll try the hatching technique. I'm going to take a pen and I'm going to start off again with light marks. And then as I get happier with the overall shape of my sphere, I'll start going a little bit heavier. I know that my light source is here. And I know that there's going to be like, this is where the light is really hitting. So it's going to be very, very bright. And then I know that somewhere in here is where there's like a shadow. And then in here, if you remember, there was a reflection. And if you're looking along with me on that reference, you can see that there is a reflected light. But it's important to note, it's not going to be the same lightness as that highlight. In fact, that highlight's probably the only area of my sphere that really should be completely white. So I start with regular hatching. And I'm just doing these very, very lightly because this is still a light area. And then what I'm going to start doing now is I'm going to start crossing where some of the darker values are going to be. I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. I'm doing this with straight lines, and then I'm going to show you a version that allows for curved lines as well, because that really works for spheres. I have a cast shadow right under here, and I know that there is a very, very dark area right at the bottom of my sphere, because that's where like no light is coming through. So I know that these lines are going to be very, very close together. And then these lines are still going to be dark, so I'm pressing them, I'm pressing hard, and I'm also making sure that they are very close together. This does take a bit of control. You want to make sure that you're not overlapping on your sphere. I'm going to show you one version of that, and then I'm going to show you a version that might work a little bit better, especially when you're using a curved, especially when you're using like a curved object like a sphere. So I'm going to redraw the same thing using a pen, and I'm going to create the same effect using a curved line. This is still hatching. My light source is still on the upper right. Okay. And now I'm going to start in with my dark shadows. This helps too, especially when you find it a little bit hard to draw perfectly round objects. By starting by drawing these little guides, you can kind of pick which ones you want to use and make darker. I said before that you can definitely kind of make it up as you go. It really helps though in the beginning stages of drawing when you're just learning and getting and improving. It really does help to kind of pick a reference. All right, so I want to add a little bit more for that one shadow that gets kind of interrupted by that reflected light. And while this isn't entirely realistic, it does still give you depth. It still does give you the idea. Somebody looking at it would say, oh yeah, that's like a ball, right? I'm also going to tell you that another cool thing about hatching is that what you can do is you can actually change the direction of the hatches to help the eye see where one object ends and another begins. And that's just a rough sketch. So those are some of the ways that you can kind of use hatching, cross-hatching, and stippling, and scribbling in order to shade a project. I can show you a few other ones. All right, so here's how we did earlier in the day. I had the cylinder, I used the hatching. I have one in here. This is where we used the scribbling technique. Okay, so what you can do with this video is you can hatch along with me, or you can practice each of these ones in rectangular form or on the forms that are on the shading website. And we are going to apply those skills to do our first drawing from life art project starting next week.